Thomas Mueller. I'm a Cree man from northern Manitoba, Canada. The community I come from is called Pugadawagan First Nation, and it's part of the Cree Nation, one of hundreds of Indigenous groups in Canada that you may or may not have heard of. Our Cree territory spans from eastern Quebec all the way to eastern British Columbia, all the way down into Montana, and divided up into multiple dialects. Like I said, we make up part of the incredible diversity of Indigenous peoples that call Canada home. Now, basically, I just first and foremost want to recognize the organizers of the People's Summit for being such incredible partners and helping so many groups elevate the perspective of frontline community people that are fighting against the climate crisis, and more importantly, fighting against the drivers of the climate crisis, of course, the fossil fuel regime and other false solutions. The sponsors of this panel are the Indigenous Environmental Network. We've been around since 1990, fighting to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth from toxic contamination and corporate exploitation. We're a network of about 250 Indigenous communities from the North Slope of Alaska all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And our flagship program is our Native Energy and Climate Program. And within that is housed our Canadian Indigenous Tar Sands campaign, which I am the lead campaigner for, and I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada, the capital city. But we have a pipelines campaign organizer in the U.S., as well as an Alberta-based organizer, Heather Milton Lightning, who is rocking an action at the U.S. Embassy right now, so she couldn't be here. So I just want to, I guess, set the context a little bit. But before I do, I want to recognize the other co-sponsors of this event. We have the Council of Canadians, which is one of the most established and oldest institutions in Canada, fighting for social justice, always there providing a critical analysis to some of the absurd policies that our government sometimes comes up with, and really, really pushing to mobilize Canadians for social justice. We're really pleased to work with them. Their energy campaigner, and of course the leader of the Council of Canadians, Maud Barlow, is one of our panelists, and Andrea Hardin is their energy campaigner. And we also have the UK Tar Sands Network, which is operated by some of our allies that are here today that will be speaking on the panel. Jess Worth of the New Internationalist magazine, a co-editor with NI, also organizer with the UK-based Climate Camp, just a kick-ass climate justice crew in the United Kingdom, holding big coal and the financial institutions accountable. We're really pleased to have the UK Tar Sands Network here. And we have James as well, who's also part of the UK Tar Sands Network, and the UK-based group Platform, which does a lot of incredible analysis and work on getting finance out of fossil fuel development and human rights. And then finally, we have Ariel Deranger of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, one of the frontline communities that's fighting against the world's largest and most destructive development, of course, tar sands. But she's also representing the Rainforest Action Network, which is a human rights organization based out of San Francisco, California. She's based in Edmonton, Alberta, and is an incredible tar sands campaigner with Rainforest Action Network, who's our partner on a lot of the tar sands work that we do. And so that said, I'd like to open up in a good way with a song. And so if everybody's not averse to that, I'll share a song with you, and then we'll jump right into the panel. Is everybody good with that? Okay, great.
Espre mi coca vida
I guess just to set the context for our gathering here today, the tar sands is just such an incredible thing. The pyramids of Giza, a Lego set. The Great Wall of China, a white picket fence. Compared to the infrastructure, the capital investment, the human resources, the amount of violations of human rights that the tar sands represents. We're talking about a labor force of 77,000 workers. We're talking about the world's largest trucks, 400 tons per load, earth movers that are 10 stories high, that are ravaging Canada's boreal forest and destroying the life paths of First Nations and Métis communities that have used this pristine, extremely important carbon sink, the boreal forest, for time immemorial. And so the objective of today's discussion is to talk about these insane things and to talk about how do we mobilize an international movement against the tar sands development. And for IEN, our tar sands campaign it includes elements of climate justice. It includes elements of, advocating for a new economic paradigm, okay? Advocating for sustainable energy systems, advocating for, green jobs for our communities. But the primary focus of our campaign and, what we really truly view as the strongest mechanism to stopping Canada's tar sands development is Aboriginal and treaty rights. And so we approach the tar sands issue within a human rights framework. In Canada, we have a very long-standing and unique political relationship and identity as Indigenous peoples with our federal government that's defined through treaties that were signed, over 100 years ago between the Crown and between our diverse First Nations. And of course, even before that, we have our inherent rights as First Peoples of the lands. And all of this is being trampled upon by this development and other unsustainable extractive industries that the Canadian economy, unfortunately, is predominantly based on. And so for us, we understand that there hasn't been a major environmental victory in Canada in 30 years without First Nations people at the helm, without the application of Aboriginal law as one of the tactics utilized to stop harmful developments, whether it's forestry or mining or mega dams or oil and gas development. And so for us, we approach the tar sands development within a social movements framework. We approach the tar sands development with a profound understanding that leadership comes and goes, but social movements last. And so, a lot of our work is really about providing accessible, easy to understand information in popular education formats in impacted communities and at different forums like this one, so that people can comprehend and understand a way to get involved and fight for energy and climate justice, and to fight for human rights, and fight for the rights of Mother Earth. And so, today we've got a panel of diverse speakers that are going to talk about, how the tar sands impacts, every segment of society, and to talk about ways to get involved. And then we're going to have a question and answer period where you can either provide commentary or have questions. There's a lot of you, though, so we want to make sure, keep it short. And the other thing, I guess, that I would just mention, just in the framing of it, is that, we have such an insane situation with the tar sands, because it doesn't just impact First Nations peoples. The entire maritime eastern provinces of Canada are also having the very social fabric of their communities destroyed, because 55,000 of the 77,000 workers that work in tar sands are flown in every 3 weeks from Canada's Maritimes, which is another region that was sacrificed at the altar of irresponsible economic policy in terms of the fishing industry that was there. You know, the fishing industry bottomed out, so where do people go? They go to Alberta when they turn 16. They work in the tar sands. And so what we're seeing is the second national sacrifice zone that's being sacrificed under the leadership of the Harper minority government. And Prime Minister Harper, I think he arrived last night or he arrives today, but anyway, you know, this is some crazy stuff that's happening. And you know, in Canada, our economy, the traditional economic backbone of Canada has always been our manufacturing sector. But this has bottomed out, and we're seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs being lost on a daily basis because of the fact that our dollar is so attached to, you know, commodities like oil and gas and like minerals. And what we're seeing now, basically, is every time the price of oil goes up, the loonie goes up. And this impacts the manufacturing sector because our biggest trading partner is the United States. Okay? And with that, you know, when our dollar goes up, they don't want to trade with us. They turn south, they turn to other parts of the international economy. And so what we're seeing now is instead of, you know, over 50% of our labor force being represented by manufacturing jobs, they're represented by retail jobs. So people are jerking Starbucks or selling Gap clothes instead of, you know, having well-paid, you know, with health benefits in the manufacturing sector. So, you know, this project is impacting the entire country of Canada. Indigenous peoples, low-income white folks. I mean, it's ridiculous. And then when we look at it from an infrastructure perspective, and I just want to plug this map really quickly, there are dozens of pipeline projects and infrastructure projects. You know, 33 oil refineries in the lower 48 United States are being retrofitted to process tar sands oil as we speak. 5 new oil refineries are proposed to be built to process tar sands oil. Shipping lanes on the west coast and on the eastern coast and in the Arctic all around North America are being introduced and proposed. Pipelines are being expanded, you know, turned around. This is a project of such epic scale and proportion that it does require, you know, an international movement against it. It is truly the biggest consolidation of corporate power ever in the history of mankind. You know, and I guess just one thing that I'll end in the framing of our panel today is that Canada's tar sands is the last playground for big oil, okay? Across the world, 80% of the world's petroleum resources are controlled by nationalized state petroleum firms. I guess a good example for Europe would be Statoil, Norway. You know, and the reality of it is that Canada has the lowest royalty rates on the planet. They have the lowest land leasing rates on the planet. And that's why you've got all of the big heavyweights, France's Total Fina, Norway's Statoil, be it British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Shell, they're all in Canada's tar sands. And most recently, Chinese petroleum companies have also come in. The world is lining up to get into what has truly become the roosting place for global greenhouse gangsters. And you know, the reality of it is right in there with them are the banks of the world, okay? And European financial institutions are also going to be talked about on this panel. They're all invested in the tar sands development as well. And that's why we're here at the Climate Forum, you know, in solidarity with each other, in solidarity with frontline impacted communities to tell a story, to ask for help, and to share tactics and strategies to start an international movement against, you know, truly the Darth Vader of the international climate change negotiations, which is the government of Canada in partnership with big oil. And, you know, we all know who the evil emperor is. You know, it's the United States. I mean, let's just be real about it. And so we're here today to talk about that. I'm going to introduce our first panelist, of course, Ariel Deranger from the Rainforest Action Network and community member of Athabasca Chippewa First Nation.
I'm going to start with something that I don't normally do, which is read from my computer, because I consulted with the leader of my community, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, before I came, and he sent me with a message. So I'm going to read from my computer to start off with. It should only take about 4 minutes, I'm guessing, hopefully. And then I'll talk a little bit more personally. So Athabasca Chippewa's First Nations' point of view on the climate change negotiations and talks is that we are very let down by the government, by the industry, and by the world. As we approach these negotiations in Copenhagen to discuss the disastrous impacts of climate change, and particularly the disproportionate impacts on Indigenous peoples, it's upsetting to see that the world continues to invest in the tar sands. The tar sands are the largest and most destructive project on the planet, with one of the largest single carbon footprints on the planet. The emissions from this project are set to grow at an exponential rate, and this is not only a concern for us, but this should be a concern of the world. The tar sands projects are directly impacting the way of life of the people of Fort Chipewyan, where the people of Athabasca Chipewyan live, and particularly the First Nations people of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. Our way of life is dying, and more importantly, our people are dying. Our lakes and rivers are poisoned, the animals that rely on the lakes and rivers are poisoned, and our way of life is being directly threatened. The land and people are affected by this. First Nations people are also being silenced by industry because they cannot speak out because of the contracts that we are bound to with industry, which I'll explain a little bit further later. The industry and government dangle carrots in front of our community that has lost their way of life at their hands. Then industry tries to entice us, and then they decide what community gets and how much. And this is problematic for our communities. They make the communities jump to just have a piece of what they have to offer. What they have to offer is destroying us. Now is time to take drastic measures to protect the environment. Right now, First Nations communities are the ones being affected. But if we continue to move forward in the tar sands the way we have been, soon everyone will be impacted. Right now, it's just minorities that are paying the high price for the demand of oil that for the rest of the world. The Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation does not stand for this and will take direct action if this does not stop. We ask the world to consider the impacts of the projects not only on the people of Fort Chipewyan and the members of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, but the impacts that the tar sands have on climate change and the rights of Indigenous peoples. If Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation does not see change in the way that things operate here in Alberta, we will be looking for support from the world to challenge this through litigation for those that continue to infringe on our rights and destroy our way of life and our people. We are tired of people suffering from other people's demand for oil. Chief Alan Adams sends his regrets for not being here and understands how important it is to be here, but there are many issues that he has to deal with at home in the community of Fort Chipewyan. So that came from the chief, and that came directly from the leadership of the community of Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. ACFN, I'm just going to make an acronym so it's a lot easier to say. ACFN, which stands for Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, has been fighting tar sands for some time. This project, the bulk of the project, or ground zero as a lot of us like to call it, is about 200 to 250 kilometers south of the community of Fort Chip. And this is where my family lives. These are my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. My grandmother, who just turned 90 this year, actually lives right in Fort McMurray now. And so, not this, literally in ground zero. And my family were hunters and trappers and fishers. You know, we lived off of the land. This was the way, and this isn't some distant thing from a long time ago. Like, my mother, I think, maybe actually here, but we used to go live on, she's back there. We lived in the bush, you know. My mom took us up there with my father, and we would go and we'd be on the land. We were trappers. We were hunters. Like, this is our life. This isn't some distant tradition that we have. And this project of the Athabasca tar sands, or the Alberta tar sands, is destroying our people's ability to continue to practice their culture and who they are and where they come from. And it seems like a really strange concept to think about when, how does that make us who we are? But I think one of the best scenarios is I didn't go back up to, I was kind of removed from my family for a while up in Fort Chip, and because my parents separated. And then when I went back after about 8 years, and in that 8 years is when we saw the massive development of the Alberta tar sands. And when I went up there, what I saw, it felt like someone stabbed you in the heart or ripped something out of you. Because this was once the most pristine, beautiful land, boreal forests, marshlands, water that in river systems so clean that I used to just go and haul water when we used to go and live out there. From the river systems. And there was literally nothing left. It was decimated. It was toxic deserts. There was these awful chemical fumes coming from everywhere. Toxic sludge being pumped into giant tailings ponds, literally just off the side of the highways, which once used to be the home to boreal forests, moose, elk, deer, wildlife, river systems, ducks, everything. And it was totally, totally, totally destroyed. And it was like at that moment that I knew I couldn't do anything but try and stop this. Try and stop this craziness. Because, you know, destroying that ecosystem, that habitat is one thing, but this project is huge. And when I started to pull back the layers of how big this project was, it became more and more incredibly disturbing at how big it was. Yeah, they might be ripping away my culture and my community and my land, but they're taking it from your pockets. I guarantee that almost every single one of you is contributing to this project. We're all contributing to this project because we're addicted to oil, because we don't know how to move forward. Tar sands has no place in a clean energy future. Everyone talks about energy security, and tar sands in Canada is clean or is secure energy because it's not coming from the Middle East. You know, climate change is the biggest security threat of our time. We don't need to be worrying about where to get oil from anymore. We need to be worrying about how are we going to move forward as a people, as humans. We can't continue to go forward in a project that is this destructive. And this project doesn't just impact my community, isn't just infringing on my community's rights. It's infringing on, you know, about 37 different First Nations communities across Canada. 37 communities across Canada are saying they don't want this project across their territory. These projects, when the chief talked about how industry, we are bound to contracts with industry, one of the most interesting things about these projects is Canada, under the policies that it's developed, says that First Nations people have a right to consultation on the permitting of all of these projects. But how this actually works and it plays out, and this is actually under our treaty rights that has been accepted and implemented into our Constitution, so it is there by law that we have a right to consultation. However, the government says consultation, it doesn't say, but it only does consultation at the very, very last stage. So the government grants the permits, the industry moves in, starts to doing their surveying, gets in their engineers, gets the project ready to roll. Literally, the bulldozers just have to move in, and it's at that point that consultation is done. So what is left for the people to say? Industry does this. They come into our communities, and I've seen it. They come into our communities and they say, you know, we've got this project. Here it is. Here's some information on it. We've surveyed it all out. It's going to be this big. We're going to create this many jobs. It's going to do this. And it's a really great project. And, you know, if you just sign off on this, we'll give your community a couple jobs. And the community says, well, what is this project really going to do? Well, just sign the paper. And if they start to question it, they go, why can't you just accept this? And then they say, if you don't sign on to this deal and you tell us we can't do this, someone else is going to come in and they're not going to give you any jobs. How about we build you guys a community center? Does your school need new computers? And this is what they do. And then we sign on to these agreements because our communities don't have an economic base. We don't have strong economies that are based on the dollar. Because our communities weren't based on that. They were based on community. They were based on our ability to live off the land, to drink the water from the river systems, to be a part of that, the nature and ecosystems, which we are intrinsically supposed to be a part of, that somehow we've removed ourselves away from. And now industry holds us accountable, holds us hostage to these projects by saying, well, you signed on to this. Why are you trying to fight it now? And that's exactly what's happening with my ACFN. ACFN signed onto some of these projects, and they're now saying that the consultation process wasn't done properly. They're saying that they weren't consulted at the right stage along the way, and they took it to court. And you know what the government said? Well, I don't know. I think this project's fine. You know what? You're complaining about this 3 years after the project started. Like, what's your problem? So we're going to dismiss your case. So the government, the Alberta government, just dismissed the case, which the First Nations is now re-challenging. But this is what our communities face. There are other communities challenging tar sands development by challenging the infringement on the rights to hunting, fishing, and trapping, which are also protected under treaty. Trying to say that this is an infringement on our rights to do that. The river systems have become so polluted that the fish are now being found with tumors and mutations on them, and high levels of arsenic, mercury, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The river systems are so incredibly poisoned that the elders are now afraid to eat the medicines and use the medicines that grow along the river systems because they're afraid they contain high levels of toxic chemicals. When you have communities that don't have or don't run by the dollar and run by the land, and you take that away from them, that is genocide. That is cultural genocide. And that is what's happening in the community of Fort Chip. That is what's happening along the pipeline corridors. That is what's happening with this giant, massive industrial project in Canada. And Canada, when they come here to do these climate negotiations, they are trying to say that the tar sands should not be affected by this. They want to go forward business as usual in Canada, and they don't think that these projects should be impacted or affected. In addition to this, these projects create 3 times more the emissions of normal crude oil. So 3 times the emissions are being created. Right now we're at about 80 metric tons per year of CO2. By 2030, they're looking at potentially 180 metric tons per year. We're talking about more than doubling our emissions in the next 20 years on a project when we're in a time of climate crisis. It's absolutely shameful to be a part of a country that is not only blocking negotiations here, but is continuing to emit carbon and destroy and erode Indigenous rights in Canada. It's disgusting. 80 million, sorry. What did I say? 80. Oh, 80 million. Sorry, 80 million. I stayed up too late last night. Sorry, guys.
Well, that ain't that bad.
It's my last night in Copenhagen, so I'm going home today. So these projects are huge. So 80 million tons increasing to 180 million tons by 2030. These projects are insane. They are psychotic. Like, it is just a psychotic project. This is an indication of scraping the bottom of the barrel. I don't know if there's any other project on the planet that is this. Like, if there's any indication, this is it. And in addition to that, you know, one of the reasons why that I just came back from the UK. I was in the UK last year, like about 3 weeks ago, on a tour, and on a tour through London, Oxford, Bristol, and Wales. And it was really great, and a lot of people asked why we were there. Why we're there is because everyone is complicit in this project. Every single country, every single major financial institution, every major oil and gas company, and that means that we're all complicit in this. Because if you have a bank account, there's a good chance your bank or your pension funds or any of the money you have in sort of stocks and bonds is in this project. Right now, just in the financial sector alone, we're talking about $200 billion financing the tar sands from various financial institutions across the planet. If we continue to go forward at the rate that we're going, we're going to be talking about like a half trillion dollar project if we continue to let them go forward, business as usual, with all the private holdings, corporate holdings. So all of our countries are complicit in this. We are all involved somehow. And we have to stop. In the UK alone, the Royal Bank of Scotland is the 3rd largest financer of this project, with $13 billion invested in the tar sands right now. And the Royal Bank of Scotland is actually 84% state-owned. So that means the UK government is supporting tar sands. The UK people are supporting and financing the tar sands. And you know, the Rainforest Action Network works on this campaign of really looking at how the financial sector and how we as individuals can have the power to stop this. Because if we can get the financial sectors and the people to adopt recognition of free, prior, and informed consent as a part of their ethical financing, and the fact that there has not been free, prior, and informed consent on any of these projects, then these projects become unethical for financial institutions to fund. And if we can cut off like billions of dollars towards this, this can sort of help set the framework for other ways of campaigning and targeting these projects, like things that the Council of Canadians does, you know, through litigation processes. All of this stuff is a part of a big giant project. There's no one-win solution. We all have to work together, and we have to stop this massive project and not allow it to continue to erode the rights of Indigenous peoples in Canada and erode our rights here in Copenhagen as Canada becomes the largest roadblock to climate negotiations. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for that presentation. Again, you know, if you've got questions, folks, keep them in your mind, write them down. We'll get to a question and comment period after our excellent panel of all women. And, well, there's James. There's James here. But, you know, it's one comment real quick about that, though, is, you know, in 10 years that I've been organizing in our Native communities fighting for environmental justice, it's always our women that are leading the charge, you know. And so I just like to just acknowledge that, you know, we have some profound, strong women that are leading in Canada, you know, from our First Nations and from just Canada in general. And I think that's a really powerful thing, and I'm humbled to sit with such powerful voices. You know, in our Cree way, we have one of the sayings we have is, you know, a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. And, you know, I think that's a really good thing, that we have that leadership to guide us in a good way to fight for the sacredness of Mother Earth. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, you know, who's an author, you know, who leads the Council of Canadians, and an activist, Mont Barlow, who's the president of the Council of Canadians, I believe. Please welcome Mont Barlow, folks.
Well, thank you very much, Clayton. And I just want to start by saying how important it is for us to show solidarity to the leadership that Ariel and Clayton and others from the communities, the First Nations communities in Canada, have been playing. And we are here to support you in any way we can. And we want you to know that solidarity is growing, and we feel really powerfully about it. You are doing incredible work. Nothing to do, forgive me for taking 1 second away from this discussion, but in today's Metro News that they send out, I read the scariest thing I've ever read in my life, and I had to quote it to you. They had a meeting of mayors and governors from around the world yesterday here, and they had a warning for the leaders here that if they don't come up with a decent agreement at the end of this COP15, the business community in the world is going to take over. I'm not kidding. They said they're going to move towards public-private partnerships. They are going to impose solutions. Arnold Schwarzenegger was cheered when he talked about the private sector having to move in and take over. Richard Branscombe, the president of a big major airline, Virgin, said, and I quote, "This week, if governments do not come to a resolution, then I think it's up to business to actually force through resolutions on this issue." He said he believes that shipping and aviation industries need to set the targets themselves. That's what's happening over in the Bella Center and around here this week, and that is why we're here, and that is why we're not going to stop our protests, no matter how rough the police get. So I just had to say that. I was really upset when I read that. I just want to make a few additions to what's been said about this incredible project. I call it Canada's Mordor because it's like the death of nature. And I used that term when I first saw the tar sands and first flew over them and first had my first real look a year and a half ago. And an industry leader there said, oh, it's not as bad as Mordor. And if you remember Mordor from The Lord of the Rings, it's the death of nature, and you have to kill nature first before you can impose your evil empire, right? And it's like, what do you mean it's not half as bad? You mean you kill half of nature? That's all right? It was just like even the admission that the comparison worked. It was just appalling. And I want to add, aside from what you heard about the emissions, that they've taken down already a boreal forest the size of Greece. So we're now talking about emissions growth that is far exceeds the targets that Canada has set, the modest, pathetic targets Canada has set. So we have become an eco-outlaw, and we're here to tell you we're ashamed, and we're going to do everything we can back in our country to change this. I only wanted to add two more things. One is on the water issue. The connection is very, very important. It takes 3 to 5 units of water to produce every unit of the oil that comes out of this guck, because they have to steam blast it out. And what they do is they hold it in giant toxic dams. The biggest one at Syncrude is second only to the Three Gorges Dam in China. It is the second biggest dam in the world, and it's full of such poisoned water that they have to let off what sounds like gunshots so that the birds don't come near, because if the birds come near and land, they die. And they regularly die in large flocks because it looks lovely and clean. I mean, if you fly over it, it's absolutely beautiful, right? And every single day, 11 million liters of toxic water are leaching into the surrounding water systems, the groundwater, and into the Athabasca. A very, very important new study by a scientist named David Schindler, an Alberta scientist, and a group of scientists, independent scientists in Canada, just came out just before we came here. And they found that the pollution from the tar sands is nearly 5 times greater and twice as widespread as the industry figures show, that the toxic emissions from the tar sands are equal to a major oil spill occurring every single year. And they talked about the poison of the rivers being absolutely directly related to this. And this is the proof that we have, and the government's still denying it. The last point that I want to make is the connection to free trade. My organization, the Council of Canadians, came into being. We're going to be 25 years old, I can't believe it, in a year. We came into effect to creation to fight the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which was the first free trade agreement in the world. Then that morphed into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That morphed into all the horrible bilateral agreements around the world. That morphed into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And what these trade agreements do is set up a constitutional level of law above your domestic law. They really want to restrict what you can do in domestic law in any way that's regulatory, whether it's social programs or environment regulations or health regulations. Anything that is restrictive to trade can be challenged. What was included in the first Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and then included again in NAFTA, was something called proportional sharing, which is that as we increase the amount of or the percentage of our exports of energy to the United States, we can't cut back. So we're running out of conventional oil and gas, and it's cold in our country. It's cold like it is here right now, it's cold. We are running out of conventional oil and gas, and so we are required to continue to look for new sources of energy under this trade agreement to send to the United States. So that's called proportional sharing. Essentially what we did was we took our energy and we made it North American energy under this agreement. And we are now locked in by a trade agreement to continue to do what you just heard about. But there's also a provision where an American energy company, an energy company of another NAFTA country, not energy companies in Canada, but another NAFTA energy company, and they're all in there. They're over 50% of the energy companies in the tar sands are American. If you were to reduce the amount of water, for instance, that they have access to, they could, and we have a legal opinion that actually says this, they could sue for financial damage, for compensation. So if Alberta ever came to its senses, and it's a horrible government, we call it the Texas of Canada, and I keep saying that I'd like to trade New England for Alberta, except for you guys, we want to keep you guys. But it's a horrible, horrible, horrible right-wing government run by the energy industry. But if ever they came to their senses and said to the energy industry, you have to cut your emissions, or cut your use of water, they could actually claim compensation under, it's called Chapter 11. And all of the bilateral agreements in the world, there are something like 2,600 of them now, 2,600. have a provision like this, an investment provision that allows a corporation to sue the government of another country if that government steps in and changes the original contract that they had. The original contract was, you can poison all this water. If you change your mind and say they have to stop poisoning, they can sue you for financial compensation. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background because we really unraveled it back when our organization got started fighting this. That's the big thing we fought was the dismantling of the National Energy Board. It moved from Ottawa to Calgary so it could be run by the energy industry. We weren't allowed to charge more for export than to ourselves. We had to stop having a 25-year gas reserve in our country. This was 25 years ago, actually a little longer, a little before that, because in anticipation of that agreement, the Mulroney government changed all the laws, gave away our energy to these energy companies, and now we're reaping the terrible results of it. So this is one of the biggest fights in the world, and when you hear what Richard Bremskin has in store for us, that if we fail here this week, that the business is going to take over the world, you just realize that what we're doing here as a social movement, as a social environmental justice movement, climate justice movement, is that we're here to say, you're not fucking taking it all over.